Wyoming Territory was a white skeleton. The land had vanished months ago, buried under a winter that refused to break, and now the sky itself was falling, erasing what little definition remained. The wind did not howl, it screamed, a high, thin sound that peeled the heat from a man's skin and left the bone to freeze. It was a barren, endless country, and tonight it was punishing. Luke felt it in his hands first. The cold always found the scars, the tight, puckered skin across his knuckles and palms where the fire had kissed him years ago. He clenched his fists inside his wool gloves, a useless gesture. The numbness was already creeping past his wrists. He was a drifter, a man whose face was a map of hard miles, a long, pale scar cut from his left temple to his jaw, a reminder from a saloon brawl in Texas. But it was the hands that marked him. He kept them hidden when he could. His horse, a tough little mare named Bess, stumbled, her breath pluming in thick, panicked clouds. She was done. They were both done. "Easy, girl," Luke whispered, his own voice sounding thin and foreign. "Just a little further. Find us a wall." He was running. 3 days running from Laramie, from the gunshot that still echoed in his ears. It had been a clean fight, a matter of self-defense, but the man he shot had brothers, and Luke had no one. So he ran, not from the law, but from the vengeance that always followed. He had pointed himself west, toward the mountains, but the blizzard had turned him, confused him, and now he was just riding to stay alive. He was searching for a line shack, a buffalo wallow, anything. The cold was a physical weight, pushing him down into the saddle. He was losing the fight. The world was nothing but a blinding, suffocating whiteness. Bess stopped, her head drooping. She refused another step. "Come on, girl, not here." He tried to spur her, but his legs were lead. It was then he saw it, a darkness in the swirl, a shape that did not belong. He slid from the saddle, his legs buckling. The snow was hip-deep, a heavy, powdery trap. He pushed through it, his lungs burning. It was a wagon, or what was left of one, a light traveler's wagon, splintered and broken, half buried in a drift. One wheel was shattered, the canvas top ripped away and flapping violently in the wind. He saw the man first. He was slumped against the ruined axle, frozen solid. His eyes were wide open, staring at the gray sky with a terrible surprise. Ice clung to his beard. In his stiff, blue hand, he clutched a pistol, the hammer pulled back on an empty chamber. Luke felt a cold that had nothing to do with the wind. He looked around. Tracks were gone, erased within minutes. Whoever did this, outlaws, or maybe just the storm itself, was long gone. He was about to turn back to his horse when he saw the other patch of white. Beside the wagon, almost completely covered by a fresh drift, was a woman. She was lying on her side, her face turned away. A drift of dark hair was fanned out against the snow. She was wearing a dress, a fine dress, made of white lace and silk, now torn, soaked, and frozen stiff. A wedding dress. Luke knelt, his knee cracking the icy crust of the snow. He touched her neck, his glove clumsy. He expected the hard, unyielding cold of the man. He felt a pulse, faint, thready, but it was there. He swore, a low, bitter sound. A living woman was a problem a dead man was not. He could not leave her. He looked up at the screaming sky. This was a cruel joke. He did not have enough life left for himself, let alone two. He scanned the horizon. There, a quarter-mile south, a thin, dark line that might be a fence, and near it, the squared shadow of a structure, a line shack. He did not think, he just acted. He scooped her up. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of frozen cloth and brittle bones. He carried her through the drifts, his own exhaustion forgotten, replaced by the sharp, metallic taste of panic. Bess followed, her loyalty overriding her exhaustion. The shack was barely shelter. It was a 16 by 16 box of rough-hewn pine, abandoned by the railroad or a cattle outfit. The wind whistled through a dozen gaps in the walls. The door hung on one leather hinge. Inside, it was dark. The floor was packed dirt, and the air was only 5 degrees warmer than the blizzard outside. But it had a roof, and in the corner, a rusted pot-bellied stove. Luke laid the woman down on the dirt floor, a mistake he realized instantly. He pulled his own bedroll from his saddlebag, his last dry possession, and spread it out. He moved her onto it, his motions rough but efficient. He turned to the stove. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely work his tinderbox. The burned skin on his palm screamed as he fumbled with the flint and steel. He used his last precious bits of kindling, shavings of wood he kept for emergencies. This was an emergency. He blew on the spark, his breath ragged. It caught. A small, hungry flame licked the wood. He added larger pieces, broken from a chair that lay in the corner. The fire caught, roared, and the stove began to tick. Heat, a weak, smoky heat, but it was life. He turned back to the woman. She was still unconscious, her skin a pale, waxy blue. Her lips were cracked. "You cannot die on me, ma'am," he muttered to the air. He knew what he had to do. He looked away, toward the fire, his face hardening. It was a thing that had to be done, and done fast. He knelt beside her. "Forgive me," he whispered, though she could not hear. His fingers, clumsy with cold and the old scars, fumbled with the tiny pearl buttons on the back of the dress. They were frozen. He gave up and took his knife from his belt. He slit the fabric, the sound of tearing silk loud in the small room. He worked quickly, his eyes averted. Focusing on the task, he cut the frozen laces of her corset and pulled the rigid, wet layers away from her skin. He stripped off her soaked petticoats and stockings, leaving her in only a thin linen chemise that was nearly dry beneath the layers. He did not look at her. He felt a deep, profound shame. The shame of a decent man forced into an intimacy he did not want. He wrapped her tightly in his wool blankets, tucking them under her chin, cocooning her. He rubbed her hands and feet, trying to force circulation back into them. He melted snow in his tin cup on the stove and, propping her head up, forced a few drops of lukewarm water between her lips. She did not stir. He added a splash of whiskey from his flask, a fiery jolt. She coughed, a small, weak sound. Luke sat back on his heels, breathing hard. He fed the fire, then went back out into the storm to care for Bess, rubbing her down and leading her into the flimsy lean-to attached to the shack. When he returned, he sat on the dirt floor, as far from the woman as he could get, and watched her. He waited. The storm raged, the cabin groaned, and the small stove glowed cherry red. She woke with a gasp. Her eyes flew open, wide with a terror that went beyond the cold. They were blue, the color of a summer sky, and they were wild. She scrambled backward, pulling the blankets with her, until her back hit the rough boards of the wall. She tried to scream, but only a dry sob came out. She was looking at him, at his face. In the flickering light from the stove, his scar was a dark, angry groove. His clothes were rough. He was a large, menacing shape in the shadows. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, no more. Where is he? What did you do?" Luke held up his hands, palms forward, showing they were empty. He stayed where he was, near the stove. "Easy, ma'am," he said. His voice was low, rough from the cold. "You are safe. I am not one of them." "Liar!" she cried, and she searched frantically for a weapon. There was nothing. "I saw you! You were there!" "No, ma'am, I found you, in the snow, by the wagon." He spoke slowly, as if calming a spooked horse. "The storm, it almost had you. You are in a line shack. You are safe from the wind." She stared at him, her breathing ragged. She did not believe him. She saw a killer. He sighed. This was wasting energy. He slowly reached for the tin cup, filled it with more warm water, and slid it across the dirt floor toward her. Water, you need it. She watched the cup as if it were a snake, but the thirst, the burning in her throat, was agonizing. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, her eyes never leaving his. She drank, spilling half of it down her chin. My husband, she stammered, the cup shaking. Elias, he was with me. Where is he? Luke looked down at his own scarred hands. He had seen death in all its forms. He knew there was no soft way to say it. He is gone, ma'am. Gone? Gone where? Did they take him? He is dead, Luke said, his voice flat, stripped of all comfort. He was frozen when I found you. I am sorry. The fight went out of her. The terror collapsed, leaving a void. She did not cry. Not at first. She just stared at the wall, at a crack where the wind whistled through. Dead, she repeated. It was not a question. It was a statement. The final, awful truth. She looked at him, her gaze suddenly sharp, lucid. Who are you? Name's Luke, just Luke. I am Clara Bellamy. She pulled the blanket tighter. We were traveling to Cheyenne. My husband, he was a preacher. We were married 2 days ago. Luke closed his eyes. A preacher's wife, a mail-order bride, most likely. He had seen them come west, full of hope, only to be broken by the land. She had lasted 2 days. He, a killer who had fled a gunfight, had just saved a preacher's widow. The irony was so bitter it tasted like ash. You should rest, Mrs. Bellamy. The storm is not letting up. We are trapped here for a while. He cannot be left out there, she said, her voice suddenly strong, steely. Luke opened his eyes. Ma'am? My husband, Elias. He cannot be left in the snow for the wolves. It is not Christian. I must bury him. Luke stared at her. She was half dead, wrapped in his bedroll, in a ruined shack, in the middle of a blizzard that could kill a healthy man in 10 minutes. And she wanted to dig a grave. That is impossible, he said. The ground is iron. The storm. I will do it myself, she said. She tried to stand, but the blankets tangled around her, and she fell back, exhausted. The silent tears came then. She wept for her dead husband, for her lost future, for the terrifying, scarred man sitting across from her. Luke watched her. He was a hard man. He had to be. This land demanded it. But the sight of her small, stubborn frame, shaking with grief but still full of fight, moved him. It was a stupid, pointless devotion, but it was devotion all the same. He stood up, his joints cracking. He pulled on his heavy coat and gloves. Stay by the fire, he commanded. Do not let it go out. He grabbed the broken chair leg he had been using as a poker and the one rusted shovel he had found in the lean-to. He went back out into the white hell. It took him 3 hours. He went back to the wagon. The snow had already drifted up around the dead man. Luke worked with a grim, rhythmic fury. He could not dig. The ground was frozen rock. He had to hack. He used the shovel as a pick, driving the rusted metal into the earth with all his weight. Each impact sent a jolt up his arms and into his wounded hands. He hacked out chunks of frozen dirt, scraping them away. He worked until sweat froze on his brow, and his lungs felt as if they were full of glass. The wind tried to tear the shovel from his grasp. He cursed the man, the woman, the storm, and the God she believed in. He made a hole. It was shallow, barely 2 feet deep, but it was a hole. He went back for Clara. She had dressed herself in the dry chemise and wrapped the driest of the blankets around her like a shawl. She followed him without a word, her steps unsteady. When she saw the body of her husband, she made a small, choked sound, but she did not break. Together, they moved him. He was heavy, stiff as cordwood. They rolled him into the shallow grave. Clara knelt in the snow. Luke stood back, his head bowed against the wind, giving her a moment. He could not hear her words. The wind stole them. He just saw her lips moving. A prayer. A farewell. When she was done, she nodded. They covered him. First the frozen chunks of dirt, then stones Luke gathered from a nearby ridge. And finally, they shoveled the snow over it all, creating a mound. It was a poor grave, but it was a grave. They walked back to the shack in silence. The sun was a weak, milky disk in the sky, meaning the afternoon was already dying. They had been outside for nearly 4 hours. Inside the shack, the warmth was a shock. Clara stumbled to the bedroll and collapsed. Luke fed the stove, his hands bleeding inside his gloves. He peeled them off, sticking them near the stove to dry, and looked at his raw palms. Night fell. It fell fast and hard, a suffocating darkness that pressed in on the small cabin. Outside, the wind's scream deepened, rising in pitch. The walls of the shack groaned. The wood cracked in the stove. It was the only sound for a long time. Luke sat on the floor, his back against the wall, his rifle across his lap. He had boiled more snow and made a weak coffee from the grounds in his saddlebag. He had a little hardtack. He offered some to Clara. She shook her head. They were two strangers, trapped in a box, surrounded by 1,000 miles of death. The isolation was a physical presence in the room. It was heavier than the snow, colder than the wind. Luke had been alone for most of his life. He preferred it. But this was different. This was an enforced solitude, shared with a ghost. Clara was sitting up, huddled in the blankets, her feet tucked beneath her. She was still wearing the ruined wedding dress under the wool. He could see the torn lace at her throat. She began to cry again. It was not the desperate sobbing from before. It was a quiet, hopeless sound. The tears tracked through the grime and soot on her face, pale lines in the firelight. She cried for the man she barely knew, for the life she had pinned her hopes on, for the utter, terrifying emptiness of the world. Luke watched her. He did not know what to do with a woman's tears. He knew guns, horses, and the cold. He knew how to kill and how to survive. He did not know comfort. He sat, silent, his knuckles white on his rifle. He watched the firelight play on her face. She was younger than he first thought, maybe 20. Her skin was fine, her features delicate. She was a piece of the civilized East, dropped into the savage heart of the continent, and she was breaking. He felt something stir in his chest, a tight, aching feeling he had not felt in years. It was pity, but it was something more. A pull, a recognition of her loneliness that matched his own. She must have felt his gaze. She looked up, her blue eyes, red-rimmed and full of grief, meeting his across the small, warm space. He saw her, she saw him. In that one look, something unspoken passed between them. He saw her fear, her loss, her stubborn faith. She saw his scars, his weariness, and the deep, guarded sorrow that lived behind his eyes. It was a warning. It was the flicker of a feeling that neither of them should allow. She was a preacher's widow, grieving her husband of 2 days. He was a killer, a drifter, a man with nothing to offer but a steady hand on a gun. Luke looked away first, back into the flames. He felt the heat on his scarred face. Clara pulled the blanket tighter, hiding her face in the wool. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the door, but inside the line shack, the silence was louder. It was the sound of 2 broken souls, waiting for the morning, terrified of what it might bring. The blizzard did not pass. It settled over the land like a shroud, locking the world in a coffin of white. For 3 days, the wind howl was the only sound. It was the voice of a hungry god, pacing the thin walls of the line shack. Inside, the world had shrunk to the 16 by 16 space. It was a cage, and the cold was its jailer. The last of Luke's coffee grounds had been boiled twice. yielding only a pale, bitter water that did little to fight the hollow ache of hunger. The remaining hardtack was gone. All that was left was a small bag of dried beans, a handful of salt, and the cold. Tension built with the drifting snow. It was a quiet, suffocating pressure. They were two breathing, living creatures trapped in a box, and the smallness of the room magnified every sound. The scrape of Luke's boot on the dirt, the soft, chapped whisper of Clara's hands as she rubbed them for warmth. They coped with the fear in their own ways, falling back on the rituals that had defined their lives. Each night, as the gray light failed and the cabin was plunged into a roaring, wind-lashed dark, Clara would kneel on the bedroll. She folded her hands, her knuckles white, and bowed her head. Luke, sitting by the stove, pretended not to watch. He could not hear her words, only the faint, rhythmic murmur of her voice. She was praying. Her faith was a shield she held up against the darkness, a desperate, disciplined appeal to a God he had long since forgotten. Luke found his own solace in steel. He would take out his whetstone and the long Bowie knife from his belt. In the red light of the stove, he would begin the long, slow, scraping pull of metal on stone. Shh, shh. It was a cold, patient sound, a counter-rhythm to the wind. He would sharpen the blade until it gleamed, a thin, silver line of light. Then he would clean his rifle. He disassembled the Winchester, laying each piece of oiled metal on a scrap of canvas. He checked the mechanism, wiping away grit that was not there, his scarred hands moving with an efficient, practiced grace. He would reassemble it, the solid click of the lever echoing in the small room. He would line up his cartridges on the floor. 7. He counted them every night. She had her faith. He had his gun. They were two souls facing the void in opposite ways. The cabin became a small, shared world. The proximity, which should have been a violation, became a necessity. Survival demanded a rhythm. He was the one who tended the outside world. Twice a day, he would pull on his coat, wrap his scarf over his scarred face, and fight his way to the lean-to. He would check on his horse, Bess, rubbing her down, murmuring to her, sharing with her a precious, shrinking handful of the beans. Then he would turn to the wood. The railroad ties he had found were frozen solid. He spent an hour each time, his breath pluming, the axe ringing against the iron-hard wood. Until he had an armload, he would return to the shack in an explosion of snow and wind, his eyebrows white with frost, his burned hands screaming in protest. Clara was the keeper of the fire. She fed it stick by stick, nursing the flames as if they were a fragile life. She melted snow in the small tin pot, ensuring they always had water. She took a scrap of her torn wedding dress and used it as a rag, wiping the soot from the stove, sweeping the dirt floor with a makeshift broom of twigs. It was a futile gesture, an attempt to impose civilization on the raw, desperate wilderness. They ate their silent meals on opposite sides of the stove, a few spoonfuls of boiled beans, heavily salted. The sound of their chewing was loud in the quiet, and they stole glances. Luke would watch her when she thought he was not looking. He watched her hands, chapped and red, as she tended the fire. They were fine-boned hands, a lady's hands, never meant for this life. He watched her profile as she stared into the flames, her expression lost, her blue eyes wide with a grief he could not measure. He wondered what she was thinking, what memories she was reliving. He wondered what she saw when she looked at him, a savior, a captor, or just another piece of the savage land that had taken her husband. Clara, in turn, watched Luke. She watched the way he moved, with a slow, deliberate economy that wasted no energy. She watched his scarred hands. She had seen them bleed after he worked the axe. She had seen them shake as he held his tin cup to the fire. They were the hands of a killer, a drifter, but they were also the hands that had dug her husband's grave. His rough kindness began to surface in small, awkward gestures. One afternoon, The light was a dim gray. Clara was sitting on the bedroll, the torn wedding dress spread across her lap. It was the only other garment she had. She was trying to mend a long, jagged tear in the silk skirt with a small needle and thread from Luke's saddle kit. Her fingers were stiff with cold, clumsy. She pricked her finger, a dark bead of blood welling up. She let out a small, frustrated sigh and put the needle down. Luke, who had been staring out the small, ice-caked window, turned. He watched her for a moment, his brow furrowed. He crossed the small space and stood over her. "Here," he said, his voice gruff. He held out his hand. She looked up, confused. "The needle," he said, impatient. She gave it to him. He took the dress from her lap. Clara stared, mouth open. He sat on the dirt floor, angled himself toward the light of the stove, and began to sew. It was a strange, terrible sight. His large, calloused, fire-scarred hands fumbled with the tiny needle. He squinted, his scarred face a mask of concentration. His stitches were large, ugly, and puckered the delicate silk. They looked less like sewing and more like sutures on a wound. He sewed with a grim determination, pulling the thread tight with his teeth. When he finished, the tear was closed. It was not pretty, but it was strong. He handed the dress back to her, not meeting her eyes. "It will hold," he mumbled, and retreated to his side of the stove. Clara ran her fingers over the rough, strong thread. She felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Later, he taught her to split kindling. The axe work left larger chunks, and they needed small pieces for the stove. He took her into the lean-to, out of the worst of the wind. He showed her how to set the small hatchet blade in a piece of wood. "Not strength," he instructed, his voice low. "Aim. Let the tool do the work." She was clumsy, afraid of the blade. She swung the mallet and missed, the force jarring her arm. "No." He stepped behind her. "Like this." He placed his hand over hers on the mallet handle, correcting her grip. His hand was large, rough as granite, and radiated a dry heat. The touch was impersonal, instructive, but it was the first time they had truly touched, skin to skin, in a way that was not medical or accidental. Clara froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Luke felt it too. He went still. He could feel the small, fine bones of her hand beneath his, the faint tremor that ran through her. He pulled his hand back quickly, as if he had been burned. "Like that," he said, his voice strained. He turned and went back into the shack, leaving her alone with the wood. Clara stood for a long moment, her heart pounding a heavy, muffled beat. She stared at the hatchet. Then, slowly, deliberately, she lifted the mallet and struck the blade. The wood split with a clean, satisfying crack. As the days trapped them, the silence began to fill with words. They were hesitant, fragmented, small pieces of their past offered up like truce flags. She asked him about his hands, the burned ones. "A fire," he said one night, staring into the stove, the red light catching the ridges of his scars. "In Texas, a barn. I was a ranch hand. A storm came up. Lightning went up like tinder." "You were inside?" "Pulling horses out," he said. "A mare and her colt. Stupid thing. The colt kept running back in. I got them out." He flexed his fists, the skin pulling tight. The mare was worth it. He fell silent, and she knew he was not just talking about the horse. She finally found the courage to ask the other question. "The gunfight, the one you are fleeing." Luke was quiet for a long time. The wind moaned. "It was self-defense," he said, his voice flat. "A man in Laramie. He did not like my face, or maybe he just liked his whiskey too much. He accused me of cheating at cards. I was not. He pulled on me." "So you killed him?" It was not an accusation, but a statement of fact. "I did," Luke said. He did not look at her. "It was not the first. I killed a man before that, down on the Brazos. He pulled on me, too. It was self-defense. The law said so. He paused. I was faster. That is all. This time, in Laramie, the man had brothers. They do not care what the law says. Clara absorbed this. She should have been terrified. This man, her protector, was a killer. He had taken 2 lives, just as those outlaws had taken Elias's. But his confession held no pride, only a vast, bone-deep weariness. He was not a monster. He was a man who had done monstrous things to survive in a monstrous land. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Call me Clara." He looked at her then. His gaze was heavy, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something beyond sorrow, beyond caution. He nodded. "Once. Clara." The true break came on the 4th night. The storm had reached its peak. The shack shuddered under an assault that felt final. The wind did not howl. It shrieked, a sound of tearing metal and splintering wood. Clara was asleep on the bedroll, wrapped in the blankets, her mended dress folded beside her. Luke was dozing, sitting upright against the wall, his rifle across his lap. She woke with a scream that tore the darkness in half. "No, Elias! God, no! Not his face! Leave him!" She was sitting bolt upright, her eyes wide and unseeing, her hands clawing at the blankets as if she were trying to dig. She was not in the cabin. She was back at the wagon, in the snow, watching the ambush, seeing the blood melt the snow around her husband's head. Luke was across the room in a single movement. He grabbed her shoulders. "Clara, wake up! You are safe!" She fought him. She did not know him. He was a shape, a man, one of them. Her small fists beat against his chest. "Let me go! They are here! They are killing him! Help me!" "Clara!" He shook her, a hard, sharp rattle that snapped her head back. "It is Luke! It is me! You are in the line shack. It is a dream. You are safe." His voice finally cut through the terror. She blinked, her wild eyes focusing on his face, on the scar, on the worried, urgent set of his mouth. She collapsed. The strength, the terror, the fight, it all drained out of her at once. She dissolved into a flood of agonizing sobs. It was not the quiet grief of the first night. This was the sound of a heart breaking apart, of a soul emptying itself. She wept for her dead husband, for her own terror, for the complete and utter desolation of her life, for the cold, empty future that stretched before her. Luke did not know what to do. He started to pull away, to give her space. "No!" she choked out, her hands shooting out, grabbing his shirt. Her grip was like iron. "Do not, please, do not leave me alone, please!" He froze. His hands, those scarred, burned, killer's hands, trembled. He was more afraid of this small, weeping woman than he had ever been of a man with a gun. Slowly, awkwardly, he sat on the edge of the bedroll. She did not let go of his shirt. She leaned forward, burying her face in the rough wool of his chest, and wept as if she meant to die from it. Luke sat rigid, his whole body tense. He did not touch her. He did not hold her. He just sat there, a solid, unmoving wall, and let her cry. He could feel her tears soaking his shirt, feel the heat of her breath, the violent, racking shudders of her body. He felt undone. He felt a fierce, terrible protectiveness, a rage at the men who had done this to her, and a profound, aching tenderness that terrified him to his very bones. The sobbing lessened, turning into quiet, hiccuping breaths. The cabin was silent again, save for the wind and the crackle of the fire. She was exhausted, but she was still trembling, a deep, bone-chilling shiver. "I am so cold," she whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. "I am so very cold." It was not the room. The stove was throwing off a decent heat. It was the cold inside her, the cold of shock, of death, of a loneliness so profound it was freezing her from the inside out. Just for a little while," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Could you Would you just stay near me until I fall asleep?" It was the most dangerous request she could have made. Luke's throat was tight. He knew what this looked like. He knew what the world, her world, would call it. A preacher's widow, not a week in her grief, asking a strange man into her bed. But he also heard the raw, desperate, innocent need in her voice. She was not a woman asking a man for comfort. She was a child, lost in the dark, begging for a human presence to hold the monsters at bay. He swallowed. "Aye," he managed, his voice hoarse. He did not lie with her. He did not get under the blankets. He lay on top of them, beside her, his back to her. He was fully clothed, from his boots to his coat. His gun was still at his hip. He stared at the rough boards of the wall, so close he could count the grain in the wood. He was a rigid, unmoving line of muscle. He could feel her, inches away. He felt the small warmth of her body, heard the tiny, unsteady puffs of her breath. He could smell the faint, clean scent of lye soap from her chemise and the salt of her tears. He lay there for an hour, maybe 2. He did not move. He listened as her breathing deepened, as the trembling subsided, as she finally, blessedly, fell into an exhausted sleep. He should have gotten up. He should have moved back to his spot by the wall, back to his rifle, back to the safe distance that separated them. But he did not. He was too tired, and the cold, he realized, had gotten into him too. The simple, non-threatening warmth of her sleeping form, even inches away, was a comfort so deep he had forgotten it existed. He closed his eyes, just for a moment. He woke to a faint gray light. He had slept. He had slept deeply, without dreams, for the first time in months. He was still on his back, and she had moved. In her sleep, seeking warmth. Clara had shifted, turning toward him. Her head was pillowed on his arm, her face just inches from his. One of her hands rested, open and trusting, on his chest. Luke stopped breathing. He lay perfectly still, his heart hammering against his ribs. He studied her face in the dawn light. He saw the faint, bluish shadows under her eyes, the chapped skin of her lips, the way her dark eyelashes feathered against her cheek. She looked impossibly young, impossibly fragile. He was acutely aware of her body, the soft, slight weight of her head on his bicep, the light, innocent touch of her hand on his shirt. It was an agony of restraint. He was a lonely man, and she was a beautiful, grieving woman. The temptation to move, to close the distance, to touch her face, was so strong it made him shake. But he did not. He was held captive by her unconscious trust. As he watched, her eyes fluttered open. They stared at each other. There was no room for confusion, no time for propriety. They were simply two people, intimately close, in the cold gray light. He saw the sleepiness in her eyes turn to awareness, then to a sudden, sharp panic. She saw his scar, his rough beard, the nearness of his face. She scrambled back, pulling the blankets with her, a choked gasp in her throat. I am sorry," she stammered, her face flooding with a hot, red shame. "I did not mean, I fell asleep." "It is all right," Luke said, his voice thick. He sat up, moving away from her, putting the stove between them. He felt clumsy, guilty, as if he had been caught in a crime. "You were dreaming. You asked me to stay." "I know, but I should not have." She pulled the blanket up to her chin, her eyes darting away from him. She was a preacher's widow. He was a drifter. What she had done, what they had done, was unthinkable. Luke stood and turned his back to her, poking at the fire. "Nothing happened. Clara, you were cold. You were scared. I sat with you." He heard her take a shaky breath. "You are a good man, Luke." His hand tightened on the poker. "No," he said, his voice low. "I am not." A new silence fell between them. It was different from the one before. It was no longer empty. It was charged, heavy, and full of a terrible, unspoken knowledge. They had crossed a line, and they both knew there was no going back. That night, the atmosphere was unbearable. They ate their tiny meal of beans in silence. Every time their eyes met, they looked away. When it was time to sleep, the small cabin felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. Clara lay on the bedroll, her back to him, her body rigid. Luke sat by the stove, his rifle across his knees, determined to stay awake. An hour passed. The fire crackled, the wind moaned. "Luke?" Her voice was so quiet he almost did not hear it. "Aye." She turned over, her face a pale oval in the darkness. "I am afraid. Not of the dream. This time, I am afraid of being alone." Luke's heart clenched. "I am here, Clara. I am not going anywhere." "I know." She paused, and he could see her struggling for words. "Last night, when I woke up, I felt safe. For the first time since before." He did not know what to say. He just watched her, his face a mask in the firelight. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes were large, luminous with unshed tears. "I am a widow," she whispered, as if testing the word. "I was a bride. Now I am a widow. But I did not love him. He was not a kind man. He married me to save me from a scandal back home. He told me I was fallen, that he would cleanse me. His touch." She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. His touch was cold. Luke felt a dark, cold anger rise in him, a feeling he knew well. "He is dead," Clara whispered. "I should be grieving. But I am not grieving for him. I am grieving for me, for the life I never had, for the warmth I never knew." She looked at him, her gaze direct, desperate, and stripped of all artifice. "Do not let me be cold tonight. Luke!" He stood up. He walked the 3 steps that separated them. He stood looking down at her, his shadow falling across her. He was shaking. "Clara," he whispered, his voice ragged. "You do not know what you are asking." "I think I do," she whispered back. He knelt in front of her. He looked at her torn dress, her chapped lips, her terrified, trusting eyes. "I am a killer. Clara, I am wanted. I have nothing. I am the very man your husband would have warned you about." "You are the man who buried him," she countered, her voice gaining strength. "You are the man who mended my dress. You are the man who sat with me in the dark, so I would not be afraid." She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his face. Not the scar, but his cheek. Her fingers were cold. Luke closed his eyes, leaning into the touch as if it were a fire. He felt something inside him break, a wall of ice that had been frozen for a decade. He opened his eyes. He took her hand, his scarred, burned palm enveloping her small, cold one. She whispered the words, a warning to him, or maybe to herself, a plea. "Do not undress me unless you will stay." He understood her instantly, and the truth of it hit him harder than a bullet. She was not talking about her clothes. She was not offering her body. She was talking about her soul. She had been stripped bare by fate. Her husband was gone. Her old life was gone. Her reputation was in ruins. All she had left was her grief and her fear, a thin chemise covering her raw, exposed heart. She was warning him, "Do not take this last layer. Do not comfort me tonight if you plan to abandon me tomorrow. Do not make me trust you, only to leave me more naked and ashamed than I already am." She was asking for a promise he did not know if he could keep. He was a drifter. He never stayed. He looked at her, his heart aching. He could lie. He could take what she was offering, a moment of warmth against the cold, and be gone when the storm broke. It would be the easiest thing. But he remembered her hand on his chest, the trusting weight of her head on his arm. He sat on the bedroll, Not beside her, but at her feet. He did not take off his coat. He did not remove his gun. He simply sat, his back against the wall, his rifle resting beside him. He was a guardian, a sentinel. "I will stay," he said, his voice a low vow. "I will sit here, Clara, all night. I will keep the fire. I will not let you be cold. I will not let you be alone." She watched him, her eyes filling with tears again. But these were not tears of grief. They were tears of a terrible, painful relief. She lay back down, her eyes never leaving his face until they grew heavy and closed. Snow covered the world outside, silent and deep, burying the dead. Inside the cabin, the stove burned low, a small red eye in the dark, and in the space between them, their restraint burned hotter than any flame, a painful, precious, and fragile thing. He sat beside her all night. The storm broke on the 6th day. It did not end with a gradual clearing, but with a sudden, shocking silence. The wind, which had been their constant companion, a howling, screaming entity for nearly a week, simply stopped. The silence that fell in its place was vast, heavy, and profound. It was the silence of a dead world. Luke was the first to notice. He had been staring at the stove, his body slumped in a weary half-trance. He lifted his head, his eyes sharp. "It stopped," he said. Clara, who had been huddled in the bedroll, also sat up. The absence of the roar was terrifying. It felt as if the world had stopped breathing. Luke rose and forced the cabin door open. It scraped against a new, deep drift of snow. He stepped out, and Clara followed him, pulling the thin blanket around her shoulders. The world beyond the cabin was ghostly white, alien, and unrecognizable. The blizzard had reshaped the land. The plains were gone, replaced by a rolling sea of white dunes, sculpted by the wind into sharp, elegant crests and deep, shadowed hollows. The sky was a pale, flat gray, and the sun was a weak, milky disk, offering no warmth. The silence was absolute. Not a bird, not a rabbit, not even the creak of a frozen tree branch. It was a beautiful, terrible, empty canvas. And they were out of food. The last of the beans had been eaten that morning. Bess, in the lean-to, was weak, her head drooping. "We cannot stay," Luke said, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. He scanned the horizon. "There is a town, Rock Creek. It is southeast of here, or it should be. 2 days' ride, maybe 3 walk-in." Clara clutched the blanket tighter. The thought of leaving the shack, their tiny, foul-smelling prison, filled her with a new dread. Here, she was safe. Out there. "People," she whispered, her fear a palpable thing. Luke turned to her. "What?" "There will be people in a town. They will ask questions." Her voice trembled. "Where is my husband? Why am I alive and he is not? Who are you?" She looked down at her ruined wedding dress, the one he had mended. It was a badge of her failure, her shame. She was a widow traveling with a scarred stranger, a man who had killed. The world would see only one thing. Luke's face was hard, impatience warring with a pity he did not want to feel. "Staying here is death. Clara, a slow, cold death. Your husband is buried. What people think, that is a luxury. We are not afforded luxuries." He turned and went back inside. "We leave in an hour." The journey was a brutal, waking nightmare. The snow was not powder. It was a crust, a solid, wind-packed shell that sometimes held their weight and sometimes betrayed it, plunging them hip-deep into the freezing drifts below. Luke led, breaking the trail. He put Clara on Bess, but the mare was too weak to carry her for long. After an hour, the horse stumbled, and Clara slid off, sinking into the snow. Luke pulled her out, his face grim. He took the reins. "We walk," he ordered. "Stay in my steps. Do not waste energy." For hours. That was her entire world. The back of Luke's worn coat, his wide shoulders, the deep, punched holes his boots made in the snow. She would place her own smaller, worn boots into his tracks, a grim, exhausting rhythm. Step, sink, lift, step. The ghostly white landscape was hypnotic and deadly. The sun offered no direction, the land no landmarks. But Luke moved with a purpose, sighting on a distant, barely visible cleft in the hills, navigating by an instinct she could not comprehend. Late in the afternoon, he stopped. He stood perfectly still, his head cocked. "What is it?" Clara whispered, coming up behind him, her breath pluming. He did not answer. He knelt, brushing snow from a dark shape frozen into the ice. Clara gasped. It was a wheel. The spoke was shattered, charred black. Luke moved forward, his hand now resting on the butt of his rifle. He crested a small drift and looked down. It was another wagon, or what was left of it. It had been burned. The snow around it was trampled, littered with the debris of a raid, a broken crate, a woman's bonnet, the dark, frozen shape of a dead ox. "The outlaws," Clara breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "Tracks," Luke said, his voice low and cold. He pointed. The wind had not yet erased them. 3 horses heading east. They are fresh, maybe half a day. He looked around. His eyes narrowed, sweeping the white hills. The silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt watchful. The men who had killed her husband were close. They were in this white, empty world with them. "We move," Luke said, his voice harder now. He grabbed her arm, not unkindly, but with a new urgency. "And we do not stop until dark." He pushed them harder, away from the tracks, heading more south. The sun was a pale smear in the west when he finally found what he was looking for. A small draw, thick with pines whose branches were heavy with snow, offering a dark, green shelter. "Here," he said, "we will make a cold camp." There was no comfort. He unrolled his bedroll for Clara, placing it on a bed of pine boughs he cut. He built a fire, but it was small, nestled between 3 rocks to hide its light. It gave off more smoke than heat. Bess stood nearby, shivering, chewing on the bark of a sapling Luke cut for her. They sat huddled by the tiny, spitting fire, the immense cold of the Wyoming night pressing in on them. They were exhausted, hungry, and now they were hunted. Clara looked at Luke. He was staring into the flames, but his attention was elsewhere. He was listening to the night. His rifle was not leaning against a tree, it was across his lap. She watched his hands. He was trying to warm them, holding them out to the pitiful fire. In the dim light, she saw what he had been hiding. The frostbite he had gotten from digging Elias's grave, combined with the brutal work of the axe and the wet cold of the journey, had ravaged his fingers. The skin on his knuckles was split open, raw and weeping. The tips of his fingers were a dark, unhealthy purple. They were stiff, clumsy. "Your hands," she whispered. He pulled them back, as if ashamed. "It is nothing." "It is not nothing." She felt a sudden, sharp anger, an emotion that surprised her with its intensity. "You are bleeding." Before he could protest, she moved. She knelt in the snow in front of him. "Give them to me." "Clara, do not be foolish. They are fine. Give them to me, Luke." Her voice was quiet, but it held a steel he had not heard before. He hesitated, then slowly, reluctantly, he held out his hands, palms up. She took them. Her own hands were freezing, but his were colder, his skin rough and damaged. She cradled them in her lap, studying them in the firelight. The scarred, burned hands that had saved her. The killer's hands that had buried her husband. They were shaking. "You are a fool," she whispered, her voice thick. She took the small pot, melted snow, and warmed the water. She tore another strip from the hem of her ruined wedding dress. The silk, once meant for a bridal bed, was now a bandage. She dipped the cloth in the warm water and began to clean the dirt and dried blood from the splits in his skin. He hissed, a sharp intake of breath, but he did not pull away. She worked gently, her touch as light as a moth. "You should have said something," she scolded him softly, her head bent over her task. "You chop the wood, you break the trail, you do it all, and you say nothing." He watched her, his expression unreadable. He watched the firelight catch the dark strands of her hair, the earnest, focused line of her brow. You cannot risk yourself like this," she continued, her voice trembling. If you cannot hold your rifle, what would I do?" The admission hung in the cold, still air between them. "What would I do without you?" She finished cleaning them. She took the driest, cleanest part of the silk and began to wrap his fingers, binding the raw knuckles. The intimacy of the act was profound. Her small, cold fingers, wrapping, tying, touching his in the vast, deadly wilderness. It was a moment of pure, quiet care. When she was done, she did not let go immediately. Her hands rested on his, their eyes met and held over the small fire. A new, fragile understanding passed between them, a bond forged in shared survival, in the silent, watchful night. She let go and sat back, pulling her knees to her chest. The silence that fell was different. It was no longer empty. It was full of what had just been acknowledged. Clara was the one to break it. The small act of tenderness had broken the dam of her own silence. She needed him to know. If she was going to die out here, she did not want to die as just the preacher's widow. "My husband," she began, her voice low, tracing a line in the snow. "Elias, he was not what you think." Luke waited, his bandaged hands resting on his knees. "He was a righteous man," or so he said. "He told me so. Every day." She let out a small, bitter laugh. "He married me to cleanse my sins." Luke looked at her, his brow furrowed. "Sins?" Clara kept her gaze on the snow. "Back home, in Ohio, I was in love with a boy, a farmer's son. My father forbade it. He was not suitable. We met in secret. We were caught." She stopped, the shame of it still hot, even in the freezing cold. "I was ruined. That is what they called me. A fallen woman. My family was shamed. I was a scandal. I was not allowed to leave the house. The boy, his family sent him west. I never saw him again." She took a shaky breath. "Then the letter came, from Elias, a preacher in Cheyenne, looking for a wife, a God-fearing woman. My father arranged it all. He told Elias the truth. And Elias, he saw it as his Christian duty, to take a stained woman and make her pure, to save my soul." She looked up at Luke, her eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. "Our wedding night, he prayed over me for an hour. He quoted scripture about harlots. His touch," she shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. "It was cold. He told me my body was a temptation, but that he would redeem it. I was not a bride. Luke, I was a penance, a payment for a sin I committed by loving someone." She finished. Her confession left bare in the cold. She had revealed her shame, her darkest secret. Luke was quiet for a long time. He did not look at her with judgment or pity. He just looked at her. When he spoke, his voice was rough with an emotion she could not name. "He was a fool," he said. He stared into the fire, and she could see a muscle working in his jaw. The sorrow in his eyes was not for himself. It was for her. It was a deep, quiet anger on her behalf. He felt the weight of her confession and knew he had to balance it. He had to show her she was not the only one marked. "I told you I killed a man on the Brazos," he said, his voice low. "I told you it was self-defense, that the law said so." He looked at his newly bandaged hands. That was not the whole truth. His name was Ames. He worked on the same ranch. My sister, Mary, she was younger than you, just 16. He stopped, his throat working. He hurt her. He found her when she was gathering eggs. He assaulted her. She did not tell anyone for a week. When I found out, she was broken. Luke's voice dropped to a cold, flat monotone. I did not go to the law. The law would have done nothing. He was already gone, drifted north. I tracked him. For 2 months, I found him in a saloon in East Texas. I called him out. I made him draw. He looked up, and his eyes met Clara's. They were filled with a bleak, cold darkness. But it was not self-defense. Clara, not really. I made him draw, but he never had a chance. I killed him long before he ever cleared his leather. I killed him for Mary, and I would do it again. He held up his bandaged hands. These hands, they have done righteous things, and they have done things no one can call righteous. We all have our sins. Clara, the ones we are given, and the ones we choose. His confession settled between them. A dark, heavy truth. They were stripped bare. She, the fallen woman. He, the righteous killer. They were just two people, branded by the world, lost in the cold. The loneliness of the wilderness, the shared confessions, the proximity of death, it all combined into a single, aching need, a need for warmth, for understanding, for a single human touch that was not born of violence or duty. He looked at her. She looked at him. The small fire crackled, a tiny point of light in the vast, cold darkness. It was slow, hesitant, inevitable. He leaned in, or perhaps she leaned toward him, or perhaps they both met in the middle. His lips touched hers. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of profound, aching loneliness. It was chapped lips against chapped lips, a desperate, clumsy search for warmth. It was the taste of salt and snow and sorrow. It was a question and an answer in one. I see you. I am broken too. It lasted only a moment, but in that moment, the entire crushing weight of their solitude lifted. They broke apart. The silence that rushed in was deafening. The kiss, so badly needed, was a terrible, shocking violation. Guilt flooded Clara, cold and immediate. She turned away, her hand flying to her mouth, her body shaking. Elias, her husband, he was dead, barely a week in his frozen grave, and she was kissing another man. A killer. What did this make her? Was she the fallen woman they all said she was? She felt torn, ripped in two between the desperate, animal need to survive and the propriety that had been branded on her soul. Luke stood up abruptly. He turned his back to her, staring out into the black, snow-covered hills. He felt a wave of self-loathing so strong it made him sick. He was unworthy. She was Grace. She was good, despite what had been done to her. And he, with his bloody, scarred hands, had just tainted her. He had taken her confession, her vulnerability, and he had stolen a kiss. He was no better than the preacher who had shamed her. Clara was weeping silently into her hands. Luke was clenching his fists, the bandages pulling tight on his wounds, his heart a cold, hard knot. And then the sound, crack! It was sharp, distant, echoing off the frozen hills, unmistakable. A rifle shot. They both froze. In an instant, the guilt, the shame, the kiss, it all evaporated, replaced by the cold, sharp adrenaline of survival. Luke grabbed his rifle. He kicked snow onto the tiny fire, extinguishing the flame, plunging their camp into darkness. "Get down!" he hissed, pulling her behind the rocks. "Do not move!" The rifle shot was followed by a faint shout, carried on the thin, cold air. The outlaws were near, and they were coming. The rifle shot was not a sound. It was a physical blow, A crack that shattered the fragile, cold silence and the unbearable tension of the kiss. Clara screamed, a thin, terrified sound. Luke moved. He was not a man anymore. He was an animal, pure instinct. In one motion, he grabbed Clara, throwing her sideways, away from the fire, into the deep shadow of the pine boughs. He kicked a cascade of snow onto the small, sputtering flames, plunging their camp into a near-total darkness. "Get down and do not move," he hissed, his voice a low, cold thing she barely recognized. The man who had confessed his sins, the man who had kissed her, was gone. In his place was the killer. Another shot rang out, closer this time, and a bullet thwacked into the tree trunk above their heads, sending a shower of bark and snow down on them. "They see us!" Clara whimpered, her hands pressed to her mouth. "They saw the fire," Luke corrected, his voice a low growl. He had his rifle, and his eyes were scanning the darkness, the faint, pale landscape of snow-lit ridges. "They are below us. 2, maybe 3. A rough voice shouted from the darkness, echoing in the cold. "We know you are there! Send out the woman! We just want the drifter!" Clara's blood ran cold. The outlaws, the men from the wagon! "Stay here," Luke commanded. He started to crawl, a dark shape moving against the snow, toward a better vantage point behind a granite boulder. "No, do not leave me," she cried, a desperate whisper. He stopped and looked back, his scarred face a pale mask in the gloom. "I kill them, or they kill us. There is no other choice. Now, stay down." He slithered away, disappearing into the shadows. Clara was alone. She was colder than she had ever been, a cold that came from her bones. She lay flat against the snow-covered ground, praying, her words a frantic, silent tumble. She heard a shout, then the boom of Luke's rifle, a sound deeper than the outlaw's pistols, a high-pitched scream, then more shots, a chaotic volley that seemed to come from all directions. Then Luke was back, grabbing her arm. "Move, now!" "Did you?" "I hit one. It made them cautious, but they will circle. We run." He pulled her to her feet. "Bess!" Clara cried, looking for the horse. Luke did not even look. He pulled his knife, ran to the mare, and cut her tether. He slapped the horse's rump, hard. "Ha! Get!" The startled mare, whinnying in panic, bolted from the trees, crashing down the draw. "A diversion," Luke panted, grabbing Clara's hand. "They will follow the horse for a minute. Run! Uphill! Do not stop!" They fled. They ran into the dark, frozen hills, scrambling up ridges, sliding down snow-filled gullies. There was no trail. There was only up. Luke hauled her, pulled her, sometimes pushed her over drifts she could not climb. Her lungs burned as if they were full of fire. Her legs were lead, and her heart was a hammering drum. The kiss, the guilt, the shame, it was all burned away, replaced by the single, primal, agonizing need to breathe, to move, to live. They did not stop for hours. They moved until the adrenaline gave out, and they were just 2 exhausted animals staggering through a merciless landscape of white and black. Dawn found them high in the foothills, near the spine of the Laramie Range. They were exhausted, frozen, and hopeless. Clara collapsed, her body refusing to take another step. "I cannot," she wept, falling into a drift. "I cannot." Luke stood over her, his chest heaving. He was scanning their back trail. There, far below. He saw them, 2 dark specks, moving slowly, following their tracks. They had not given up. "Get up, Clara," he said, his voice raw. "They are still coming." "Yes," he pulled her to her feet. "So we keep moving." He half carried her for another mile. The land was changing, growing steeper, more rugged. The wind was picking up, a high, thin whine, and then he saw it, tucked into a high cleft of rock, half buried in a drift, was a structure. It was an old mining cabin, built of stone and rough-hewn pine, abandoned when the vein ran dry. Its roof was sagging. One wall partially collapsed, but it was solid. It was defensible. "There," he panted, pushing her toward it. They stumbled inside, falling onto the packed dirt floor. It was a ruin, but it had 4 walls, a stone hearth, and a heavy plank door hanging on one leather hinge. Luke staggered to the door, shoving it closed, and dropped the heavy timber bar that lay beside it. They were safe, for a moment. The cabin was a tiny, cold refuge. Clara leaned against the stone wall, her body shaking so violently her teeth chattered. Luke did not rest. His eyes were alight with a cold, clear focus. He moved to the small, grime-caked window. "They will be here by dusk," he said. He looked at Clara. She was staring at nothing, her blue eyes wide with a terror that had hollowed her out. "Clara!" His voice was sharp. She blinked. "Clara, I need you. We are not dead yet." His words, hard as they were, seemed to steady her. She nodded, pulling her blanket tighter. "Good." He set to work. He was a man possessed. He checked the walls, the gaps between the stones, stuffing them with old rags and dried moss he found in a corner. He examined the door, reinforcing the bar with a piece of rusted mining equipment. He was building a fortress. "There is an old bucket," he said, pointing. "The hearth is good. I need water. Melt snow, as much as you can. We will need it, but stay low. Do not go out the door. Use the hole in the back wall." Clara found the rusted bucket. She found a purpose. While Luke reinforced their tiny prison, she crawled out the collapsed section of the back wall, staying low, and began gathering bucketfuls of clean, drifted snow. She built a small, careful fire in the hearth. The smoke would be a beacon, but they already knew the outlaws were coming. Warmth and water were more important now. Their unspoken bond grew in the desperate, silent work. They were a team. They did not speak of the kiss or the chase. They spoke of tasks. "There is wood stacked by the old ore chute," she said, returning with snow. "The door bar is weak," he said, wedging a stone under it. She melted the snow, and he drank deeply from the tin cup, his bandaged hands shaking. She looked at his wounds, and a fresh pang of fear hit her. He was hurt, he was exhausted, and he was all she had. Dusk fell. The world outside the cabin turned a deep, bruised purple. The wind began to rise, whistling through the cracks Luke had not yet filled. "They are here," Luke said. He was at the window, peering through a small, clear spot. Clara's heart stopped. She crept beside him and looked. Far below, at the base of the ridge the cabin sat on, were 2 riders. They sat on their horses, 2 dark, menacing shapes against the snow, staring up at the wisp of smoke from the chimney. One of them shouted, his voice thin and distant on the wind. "We know you are in there. You filth! You killed Silas. You will pay for that." They dismounted. They were cautious. They knew he was armed, and they were in a bad position. Below him. "Get away from the window," Luke ordered, his voice flat. He pushed her gently toward the hearth. "Stay there. Keep your head down. No matter what you hear." "What will you do?" she whispered. "Wait." He took his rifle. He had 4 cartridges left. He had counted them. 4. The standoff began. The tension was a living thing, a tightening wire in the small, dark room. The only sound was the hiss of the fire and the moan of the wind. Clara knelt by the hearth, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She was praying, her lips moving without a sound. Luke stood by the window, a shadow against the wall. He was perfectly still. He was listening. An hour passed. The purple light faded to a deep, moonless dark. "They are moving," Luke whispered. Clara heard nothing, but Luke had heard a stone skitter, a muffled curse on the wind. One is coming up the main path. The other is trying to circle to the back. The fool! He moved to the door, resting his Winchester on the sill of a loophole he had cleared. He waited. He was a statue of patience. Clara saw a shadow move past the window. A man's voice. Close this time. "Give it up! It is 2 against 1! We will burn you out!" Luke did not answer. He waited. The man on the path grew bolder. He scrambled up the last few feet and rushed the door, his pistol firing. Bang! Bang! Bullets splintered the heavy wood. He threw his shoulder against it. It did not budge. "The bar is holding," Luke whispered. He crossed the room to the back. To the hole Clara had used. The other man was there, trying to scramble through the collapsed wall. He thought he was being quiet. He was not. Luke stood over the hole, his rifle aimed down. The man's head and shoulders appeared. He grunted, pulling himself up. He looked up, and his eyes met Luke's. His face was a mask of surprise. Crack! The sound of the rifle in the enclosed cabin was deafening. Clara screamed. The man jerked, a dark hole appearing in his chest, and fell backward out of the hole, disappearing into the darkness. He made no other sound. "1," Luke said, his voice hard. He moved back to the door. The man outside roared, a sound of pure rage. "You are dead! You hear me? Dead!" He emptied his pistol into the door. Bang, bang, bang! Luke stood beside the door, waiting. He heard the man fumbling, reloading. He was crying, cursing his dead partner. In his rage, he was being stupid. He kicked the door, a furious, desperate sound. Luke moved to the window. He saw the man, a dark shape, standing just feet from the cabin, his back to the window as he reloaded his gun. He was exposed. Luke leaned out, just enough to aim. He fired his third shot. Crack! At the exact same instant, the man spun, firing wildly. Bang! A sound like a sledgehammer hitting a side of beef. Luke grunted, a deep, agonizing sound, and collapsed backward, dropping his rifle. "Luke!" Clara shrieked. She scrambled to him. He was on the floor, on his back, his face pale and slick with sweat. A dark, wet stain was spreading rapidly across his left shoulder. "I am hit!" he gasped, his voice tight with a pain that stole his breath. The door! Bar it! In case—" But the man outside was silent. Luke's shot had found him. Clara ignored the door. She knelt over Luke. "Where? How bad?" "Shoulder," he panted, his eyes squeezed shut. "High. Went through." Blood was everywhere. It was dark, pumping, covering his coat. She had to stop it. "The light!" she said, her voice shaking. She threw more wood on the fire, desperation making her strong. The cabin lit up in a flickering, hellish light. She tore open his coat, his shirt. The wound was ragged, terrible. "Pressure!" he gasped, his hand weakly trying to cover it. She needed something, a bandage, anything. Her eyes fell on her bundle by the hearth, on the mended, ruined silk of her wedding dress. She did not hesitate. She grabbed it. She tore the skirt, the symbol of her old life, her lost hope, into long, desperate strips. "Hold this," she commanded, her voice high and trembling. She pressed a thick wad of silk against the entry wound, and another against the exit wound on his back. He cried out, a raw, choked sound, and she pressed harder. "I am sorry. I am sorry," she wept, her tears falling hot on his cold face. "You have to live. Do you hear me? You cannot leave me." She dragged him, his dead weight a terrible burden, closer to the fire. She covered him with his bedroll, with her own blanket. She worked all night. She was no longer a lady. She was no longer a widow. She was a raw, terrified animal, fighting for the life of her mate. She cleaned the wound as best she could with hot water and more strips of silk. She bound it, her hands covered in his blood. He faded in and out of consciousness, muttering, his body shivering with shock and cold. She knelt beside him, her face stained with his blood and her tears, and she prayed. They were not the quiet, memorized prayers of her old life. They were desperate, raw, bargaining pleas. "Please, God," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Do not take him, not him. I cannot be alone again. He is a good man. He is good. Please, take anything else, but not him." She did not know when she started crying, but she could not stop. Her tears dried on his face, mingling with the sweat and grime. Hours passed. The wind howled. The fire crackled. The dead man outside was silent. Sometime before dawn, in the darkest, coldest hour, his eyes flickered open. They were clear, but filled with a world of pain. He looked at her. "Clara," he rasped. His voice was a dry leaf. "I am here," she whispered, brushing the damp hair from his forehead. "I am here." "You are crying. You are hurt. The other man, he is silent. I think you got him." He closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing it. He tried to move, and a wave of pain made him gasp, his body arching off the floor. "Shh, shh," she soothed, pressing him gently back down. "Do not move. It is bad." "Aye," he breathed. "It is bad." He looked at her, his gaze intense, searching her face. "You should have run." She sobbed then, a broken, helpless sound that came from the deepest part of her. "I could not. I cannot." "Why?" he whispered, his good hand finding hers, his grip surprisingly strong. "Why stay? For this?" She bent her head, pressing his hand to her cheek, her tears wetting his skin. "Because I cannot bear it," she confessed, the words tearing out of her, raw and true. "I cannot bear to lose you, too. Do not you see? Luke, I cannot. I would rather die here with you than be alone out there." The confession hung in the air, a thing more real and more solid than the stone walls around them. It was the truth. It was the only truth left. He saw it in her eyes. He saw her, not as a widow, not as a lady, but as a woman, as desperate and broken and lonely as he was. He pulled her, gently, with his good arm. "Clara!" She came to him, without resistance, without thought. She lay down on the hard dirt floor beside him, her body fitting against his, careful of his wounded shoulder. He drew her close, his arm wrapping around her waist, holding her tight. They were trapped. They were wounded. They were murderers. The world outside was cold and silent and full of death. The morning would bring what? A posse? Wolves? They had nothing, no future, no hope, no propriety, no salvation. All they had was this one dark, terrifying night. All they had was each other. He kissed her. This time, it was not hesitant. It was a kiss of agonizing need, of fear, of a profound, desperate claiming. It was the taste of blood and tears and wood smoke. They gave in. It was not a choice. It was an inevitability. It was the last, desperate act of two living souls in a dying world. It was a clinging to life, a frantic, tender confirmation that they were still breathing, still warm, when everything else was frozen. It was an act born of terror and shadow, and a love so new and so fierce it cared nothing for the rules of a world that had tried to kill them both. It was tender, and it was desperate, and it was the only real thing that had happened to either of them. Afterward, she did not sleep. She lay beside him, her head resting on his good shoulder, her hand spread flat over his heart, listening to its unsteady beat. He had fallen into an exhausted, pained sleep. She stayed awake, a sentinel, watching him breathe as the fire burned low. She brushed the damp hair back from his forehead, her touch infinitely gentle. Her gaze drifted to the hearth. Beside it, In a crumpled pile was what was left of her wedding dress, a few scraps of silk, stiff and dark with his blood. She stared at it, the symbol of her old life, her shame, her rescue, the dress she had been buried in, the dress she had been saved in. Now, it was a bandage, soaked in the blood of the man she loved, the man she had just given her body and soul to, on a dirt floor with 2 dead men outside. She was no longer Clara Bellamy, the preacher's widow. She did not know who she was. She only knew she was his. Morning came, a pale, gray, merciless light. The cabin was silent. The world was silent. Clara was stiff, cold, but she moved. She gently untangled herself from Luke and went to the window. She peered through the crack. The snow was pristine, blue in the dawn shadows. Down on the path, half buried in a new drift, lay a dark, frozen shape. The outlaw. Further down, by the rocks, lay the other one, the man who had tried the door. 2 bodies. The wind had erased all other tracks. The world was empty. She turned back. Luke was awake. He had been watching her. His face was pale as death, lined with pain, but his eyes were clear. "They are gone," she whispered. He nodded, his jaw tight. Gone! They both knew what this meant. They were alive, but they were also murderers. He had killed 3 men. She had been with him. They could never go to Rock Creek. They could never go to Cheyenne. They could never go back to the civilized world and explain the 2 bodies, the dead preacher, the burned wagons. The law would not see the truth kindly. They would see a drifter, a killer, and a fallen woman. "We cannot go back," she said. It was not a question. "No," he agreed, his voice a rasp. He pushed himself up with his good arm, gritting his teeth against the pain. She rushed to help him, her hands gentle. "You cannot ride," she protested. "You are weak. You have a fever." "I can ride," he said, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the far wall, as if he could see through it. "I will ride, or I will die here. We go west, toward the mountains, away from all this." She looked at him, at his pale, determined face, at the bloody bandage she had made from her wedding vows. Her old life was over, burned and bled away. Her new one, this raw, terrifying, love-filled one, had just begun. She nodded, her voice clear and strong. "I will get your rifle. We ride west." They found a measure of peace in a high valley, a green crease in the land carved by a river that ran cold and fast with the first melts of spring. The valley was hidden, sheltered by pine and aspen, and for weeks, it was their world. It was a fragile peace, built on the shared memory of terror and the unspoken promise of their desperate love. Luke's wound, torn open in the escape from the mining cabin, was slow to heal. The first week, a fever took him. He lay in a small shelter they built of fallen pine boughs, shivering and muttering, his skin hot to the touch. Clara did not leave his side. She was his anchor. She bathed his face with snowmelt, cleaned the ragged wound with the last of the whiskey from his flask, and fed him broth she made from a single, tough grouse she had managed to kill by throwing a rock. She held his hand when he trembled, her presence a steady, solid thing. She had saved him once. She was saving him again. As the fever broke and his strength slowly returned, their roles reversed. He was the teacher, she was the student. The wilderness, once her enemy, became her primer. He was a patient man. She learned. His voice, so often rough or flat with weariness, became gentle when he was instructing. He taught her how to ride properly, not side saddle like a lady, but astride like a person who needed to move fast. He had found a pair of worn men's trousers in the abandoned mining cabin, and she put them on without a second thought. The feeling of the fabric against her legs, the freedom of movement, was a revelation. She was no longer bound by corsets and petticoats. "Keep your heels down," he would say, his hand on her knee, his touch warm and instructive. "Feel the horse. It is not just you, and it is not just the animal. You are one thing, moving." She laughed, a real, unburdened laugh, when she almost fell, and the sound startled them both. It was a sound of life, bright and clear in the quiet valley. He taught her to fish. They would sit on the riverbank for hours, the cold water rushing past. He showed her how to bait a hook he had fashioned from a small bone, how to cast the line, how to feel the almost imperceptible tug. When she caught her first trout, a small, silver, flashing thing, she had cried out with a pure, childish joy. They had cooked it over the fire, and it was the best meal either of them had ever tasted. Then he taught her to shoot. This was the hardest part. The rifle was the symbol of what had happened, of the men he had killed, of the violence that haunted them. She was afraid of it. Her hands shook when she first held the heavy Winchester. "You are afraid of it," he said, not unkindly. It is a terrible thing. It is a tool," he said, his voice quiet. He stood behind her, his good arm coming around her to help her hold it steady. His chin was near her hair. She could feel his breath. "Like the knife, like the axe, it is a tool for living out here. You do not have to love it. You just have to respect it, and you have to know how to use it." His scarred hand covered hers on the stock. His other hand guided her to the trigger. "Aim true," he whispered, his voice by her ear. "Do not fight it. Squeeze. Do not pull. Just squeeze." She fired. The crack echoed off the valley walls, and the recoil slammed the stock into her shoulder. A heavy, painful punch. She missed the pine cone he had pointed at by a foot, but she had done it. She practiced every day. Her hand stopped shaking. She learned to load, to aim, to breathe, to squeeze. She became proficient. She was a long way from being good, but she was no longer afraid. She was changing. The soft, grieving, terrified woman from the line shack was being burned away. In her place, a new woman was being forged. She was leaner, stronger. Her skin was browned by the wind, her hair cut short with Luke's knife for practicality. She wore men's clothes. She could ride, she could fish, she could shoot. She smiled now, and when she looked at Luke, it was not with the desperate, clinging need of a survivor. It was with the steady, quiet love of a partner. But the peace was fragile because the world was still out there. The guilt gnawed at her. In the quiet of the night, when Luke slept beside her, his good arm draped over her waist, she would lie awake, staring at the stars. She had taken a lover, a man who had killed. While her husband of 2 days was still fresh in his frozen grave, she had shot a man in a rage. She had fled. "What have we done, Luke?" she whispered one night to the fire. He was awake, watching her. "We lived," he said simply. "Is that all it is?" "For now," he said, pulling her closer. "It is enough." It was not enough. They were running low on salt, on flour, on ammunition. They could not hide in the valley forever. Luke, his shoulder now a puckered, angry scar but fully healed, knew he had to risk going to a trading post. It was 20 miles south, a small, fly-speck establishment on the emigrant trail. He went alone. He left her the rifle and 2 bullets. "If I am not back in 3 days," he said, "take the horse and ride west. Do not stop. Do not look for me." "Luke," she had cried, grabbing his shirt, her old fear returning. "I will be back," he promised, kissing her, a hard, fast kiss. "I will always come back to you." He was gone for 2 days. They were the longest 2 days of her life. She sat with the rifle, watching the ridge, starting at every sound, every snap of a twig. He returned on the evening of the 2nd day. He had flour, salt, coffee, and cartridges, but he brought something else back. Too, he was grim, his face set in hard lines. "What is it?" she asked, knowing it was bad. "I heard them talking," he said, unpacking the supplies. "The postmaster. A man from Laramie. He paused, not looking at her. The story is out. What story? About us, about the ambush. He finally looked at her, his eyes dark. They are not blaming the outlaws, not anymore. The story they are telling is that the preacher's new bride, a woman with a bad reputation from the East, was in on it. That she ran off with a drifter, a man, who they say killed her husband. Clara's blood ran cold. She sank onto a log. They think we killed him? They think I am his killer, Luke said, his voice flat. And that you are my accomplice, my harlot. The word hit her like a physical blow. Harlot. It was the word Josiah would use. It was the word her father had used. The shame was so profound, so suffocating, she could not breathe. We cannot stay here, Luke said, his voice urgent. They are not just looking for outlaws. Clara, they are looking for us. They were packing their meager camp the next morning, loading the horse, when they heard them. The sound of multiple horses, riding hard, coming up the valley. Luke grabbed his rifle. Run! Hide in the rocks! Take the horse! No, I am not leaving you! Clara, do as I say. This is not two men, this is a posse. But it was too late. They came around the bend, 7 of them. They were not ragged outlaws. They were armed, grim-faced men, and at their head rode a man in a black, respectable coat, his face pinched and pale with a cold, righteous fury. He pulled his horse up, his eyes finding Clara. Clara, he shouted, his voice echoing in the valley. Woman, show yourself. Step away from that killer. Clara froze. She knew that voice. It was the voice of her dead husband. Josiah, she whispered. Who? Luke said, his rifle trained on the man. My brother-in-law, Elias's brother. Harlot! Josiah Bellamy screamed, his face contorting. He dismounted, his movements jerky. You dare to live? You dare to stand there with the filth that defiled you? Josiah, no! Clara cried, stepping forward. It was not him. It was outlaws. They killed Elias. They left us to die. Lies, he spat. The lies of a soiled, godless woman. We know what you are. We know what you did. You shamed my brother in life with your Ohio scandal, and you spat on his grave in death. He pointed a shaking finger at Luke. And you are the devil that led her to it. I vow before God, you will hang in Cheyenne for this. Luke stepped in front of Clara, shielding her with his body. The Winchester was steady in his hands. That is enough, he said, his voice a low, cold warning. You have the wrong story, mister. You will turn your horses and ride out of this valley. Will I? Josiah sneered. I have a warrant for your arrest. Murderer, and I have 7 men. He looked past Luke, at Clara. Seize him. Do not harm the woman. She will be brought back to Cheyenne to face the judgment of the church. Luke knew he could not fight them all. He was one man, healed, but not whole, against 7. He saw the cold certainty in their eyes. Clara, he said, his voice low. When I move, you run for the rocks. Do not stop. He raised his rifle. I am telling you, leave. Kill him, Josiah said, his voice flat. But they did not want to kill him. They wanted to hang him. One man, faster than Luke expected, circled wide and clubbed him from behind with his own rifle butt. Luke crumpled, his Winchester falling to the dirt. No! Clara screamed, lunging forward. Josiah grabbed her, his fingers biting into her arm like talons, and forced her to watch. Watch, harlot! Watch how we treat the men who defile our family. Watch what we do to the devil who stole my brother's righteous inheritance. The posse men were on Luke in an instant. They kicked him, their heavy boots sinking into his side, his back. They hauled him to his feet, and one man hit him. A hard, brutal fist to the jaw. Luke's head snapped back. They hit him again. Stop! Clara shrieked, fighting against Josiah's grip. "You are killing him! Stop it!" They beat him until he was a senseless, bloody ruin. His wounded shoulder, the one she had just healed, was torn open, blood soaking the front of his shirt. They bound his hands and feet with rough rope. Pulling it so tight it cut into his skin, they threw him, like a sack of butchered meat, over the back of his own horse. Clara was shaking, sobbing, numb. Josiah threw her onto her horse, tying her hands to the pommel. He mounted and rode beside her, his face a mask of triumph. "You will be taken back to Cheyenne," he said, his voice clipped and cold. "The church elders will hear your confession. You will be cleansed. You will repent your sins." Clara stared at Luke's body, slumped over the saddle. He was alive. She could see the faint, agonizing rise and fall of his back, but he was so still. Something inside her, the soft, grieving part, finally died. It broke apart, and in its place, a cold, sharp, terrible rage began to build. It was the rage of the woman who had learned to shoot. "You," she said, her voice a low, unfamiliar rasp. "What did you say, woman?" Josiah asked, annoyed. "You," she repeated, turning to face him. Her eyes were not full of tears. They were dry, blazing, and as cold as the river. "You did this. I am bringing a killer to justice, as is my right." "No," her voice was gaining strength. "You did this. You killed him. You killed Elias." Josiah stopped his horse. The whole posse stopped. They were on a high ridge, the wind whistling around them. "What madness is this?" he scoffed. "You accuse me?" "The ambush," Clara said, the pieces flying together in her mind, forming a terrible, clear picture. The outlaws who knew exactly where they were, the rumor that had spread so fast, his convenient, righteous arrival. It was too perfect. They knew where to find us. They knew Elias was carrying money. "You are insane," he said, but his eyes flicked, just for a second, to the men behind him. "He told me," Clara cried, her voice rising. "Elias told me he was carrying the church inheritance, his inheritance from your father, the money that was supposed to be his, but that you always wanted. He told me you hated him for it. He told me you thought he was a weak, pious fool." Josiah's face, pale and pinched, darkened. "Silence, woman. You are delirious with your sin." "You hired them!" Clara screamed, the truth of it echoing off the rocks. "You hired those men to kill him. You paid them to stage an ambush. You just did not expect me to live. You did not expect a witness. And when you heard I had, you spread the rumor. You raised a posse. You came to silence me. You came to silence him." She pointed a bound hand at Luke's broken form. The posse men were looking at each other, uneasy. They were hired men, not murderers. Josiah Bellamy looked at his men, then back at Clara, and he laughed. It was a cold, thin, ugly sound. "You," he sneered. "A witness? Who, in all of Wyoming territory, will believe you? A harlot who ran off with a drifter the moment her husband was in the ground? A woman shamed by her own family in Ohio?" He spurred his horse closer, leaning in, his voice dropping to a vicious, triumphant whisper. For her alone. "Yes, I did. He was a weak, spineless fool. He did not deserve that money. He did not deserve a wife, even a soiled one like you. He deserved the cold ground he got." He smiled. "And this one," he gestured to Luke. "He just made it perfect. Gave me a killer to blame. And now, I get the inheritance, the good name, and the satisfaction of seeing you both pay." The admission hung in the thin, cold air. "And now," Josiah said, his smile vanishing, "you will both be silenced. Him for murder, and you, well, the trail is a dangerous place. Accidents happen." He raised his hand, signaling to one of his men, "Gagger, we are done talking." He turned his horse, drawing his own pistol. He looked at Luke's unconscious form. On second thought, why wait for the hangman in Cheyenne? He cocked the hammer, aiming the pistol at the back of Luke's head. "No!" Clara screamed. The rage consumed her. It was pure, white-hot, and absolute. The man beside her, the one Josiah had signaled, had his rifle in his saddle scabbard. He was reaching for a gag. Clara acted on pure, trained instinct. She kicked her horse, slamming it into his, as the man swore, fighting for balance. She lunged, her bound hands grabbing the rifle from his scabbard. It was a Winchester. It was heavy. It was familiar. "Clara!" Josiah yelled, turning, his pistol swinging toward her. She did not aim. She did not think. She just reacted. She brought the rifle up, a clumsy, desperate movement, and pulled the trigger. Crack! The sound was deafening. The recoil nearly threw her from the saddle. Josiah Bellamy stared at her. His mouth was open, his expression one of profound, stupid surprise. A dark red flower bloomed on his respectable black coat, right over his heart. He toppled from his horse, his pistol firing harmlessly into the sky, and lay still in the snow. For a long, terrible second, everyone was frozen. The 6 remaining posse men stared at their dead leader. Then they stared at Clara. She held the rifle, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold it, but she did. She levered another round into the chamber. The click, loud in the silence. Her face was a mask of tears and smoke and pure, terrible rage. "Get back!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "Get back, or I will kill every last one of you. I swear to God I will." They hesitated. Their leader was dead. They were just hired men. They looked at this wild, weeping woman who had just killed their boss without flinching. They were not being paid enough for this. "Go!" she shrieked, aiming the rifle at the nearest one. "Go!" One by one, they turned their horses. One man dismounted quickly and grabbed Josiah's body, slinging it over his saddle. Then they rode. They rode fast, down the valley, leaving her and Luke alone with the wind and the blood. The silence that fell was heavy, suffocating. Clara slid from her horse, her legs giving way. She crawled on her hands and knees to Luke's horse. Her hands, still bound, were clumsy. She grabbed the knife from Josiah's fallen belt and sawed at her ropes until they fell away. She cut Luke's bonds. She pulled him down from the horse. He was a dead weight, groaning, his face a ruin, his shoulder a river of fresh blood. "Luke, Luke, wake up," she pleaded, cradling his head in her lap. His eyes flickered. He was barely conscious. "Clara, I shot him," she whispered, her voice hysterical. "Luke, I killed him. I killed Elias's brother. I killed him." "Good," Luke gasped, a faint, bloody smile touching his lips. "Good, girl." He was weak. He was bleeding badly. And the sky, which had been clear, was turning a thick, heavy gray. Snow was beginning to fall. The posse would come back, or the law. They could not stay. "We have to go." She hauled him to his feet. He leaned on her, almost his full weight. She did not know she was this strong. She got him onto her horse, the more sure-footed of the two. She climbed up behind him, her arms wrapped around him, holding him upright, his blood soaking her. They rode, not west, just away, into the hills, as the snow began to fall, covering their tracks, covering the blood of Josiah Bellamy. They found a barn, an old, collapsing hay barn on an abandoned homestead, its roof half gone. It was shelter. She dragged him inside, out of the rising wind, and made a bed for him in a pile of old, musty hay. The snow was falling thick and fast now, a white curtain sealing them off from the world. They were hidden. She sat beside him, his head in her lap. He was shivering, his breathing shallow and quick. He was weaker than he had been in the line shack, much weaker. His body was beaten, his spirit low. "You should go," he whispered, his voice a thread. His eyes were closed. "Clara, leave me. They will find you. With me. They will hang you. Survive." She looked down at his face, so pale and beaten, the scar on his cheek standing out against the bruises. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but hard as iron. He opened his eyes, his gaze finding hers in the gloom of the barn. "You said," she whispered, her voice breaking, "that you were a man who did not stay. You said you were a drifter." She took his hands, not his scarred, burned hands, but his beaten, bloody, rope-burned hands. She wrapped them in her own, holding them tight, as if she could pour her strength into him. "You will stay," she whispered. It was a command. It was a prayer. "We will both stay. I am not leaving you. Do you hear me? I am not leaving." He tried to speak, to protest, but she just shook her head, tears rolling down her face and dripping onto his. "You'll stay." He closed his eyes, his breathing faint. Clara held him, rocking him gently. As the barn grew dark and the snow piled up in silent drifts against the broken door, she listened to the wind and to the faint, shallow rattle of his breath, and she waited. At dawn, she heard it. The crunch of boots in the new snow, the jingle of a bridle, the low murmur of men's voices. They were not alone. The posse, or a new one, had found them. She laid Luke's head gently on the hay and picked up the rifle. She checked the load. Her hands were perfectly steady. The crunch of the boot in the snow was the only sound in the gray dawn. It was followed by a low, cautious voice. "The tracks end here. They are in the barn." Clara did not breathe. She lay in the hayloft, the rifle heavy and cold in her hands. Its wooden stock pressed hard against her cheek. Below, in the dim, musty hay, Luke was a still, dark shape, barely conscious, a faint, rattling breath his only sign of life. The posse had come. She counted 4 of them, moving like shadows through the falling snow. They were not the same men from before. These men looked harder, colder. They were not hired hands. They looked like bounty men, or perhaps just the law from a town she did not know. It did not matter. They were here for Luke. They were here for her. "Ho, the barn!" a man shouted, his voice hard. He was a broad, bearded man, clearly the leader. "We have you surrounded. We know you are in there. Killer! We found Bellamy's body. Send out the woman and it might go easier on you." Clara's heart hammered, a sick, heavy beat against her ribs. She looked down at Luke. His eyes were closed. He was too weak to move, too weak to even know they were here. She was alone. "I said, send out the woman," the man shouted again, impatient. He gestured to 2 of his men. "Circle to the back. Put a bullet in anything that moves." Clara knew what was coming. They were not here to talk. They were not here for justice. They were here for blood. The woman who had learned to shoot a rifle, the woman who had killed Josiah Bellamy, knew she had only one choice. It was the choice Luke had taught her. It was the choice the wilderness demanded. Survive. She positioned herself at the front of the loft, a small, dark opening that gave her a clear view of the men below. Her hands were steady. Her face was streaked with the dirt of the trail and the dried tears of the night, but her eyes were clear and cold. "Last chance!" the leader yelled, taking a step toward the barn door. Clara squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle was deafening. The man yelled, not in pain, but in surprise and rage, as the bullet kicked up snow at his feet. It was a warning shot. She had not aimed for him. "She is armed!" he roared, diving behind an old, broken wagon. "Fire! Light them up!" The world exploded. A volley of gunfire erupted from the posse. Bullets tore through the thin, rotten boards of the barn. Wood splintered, zinging through the air. Hay was kicked up in clouds. Clara flattened herself, pressing her face into the musty straw as the air above her head filled with the hot, angry buzz of lead. She heard Luke groan below, a faint sound of pain. The sound of his voice, his pain, ignited her. The fear vanished, replaced by the same cold, white-hot rage she had felt when she shot Josiah. She rose, a ghost in the shadows of the loft. She saw one of them, moving from the wagon to a better position. She aimed, she breathed out, she squeezed. The man cried out, a high, thin sound, and grabbed his shoulder. He staggered, dropping his rifle, and fell back into the snow, wounded. "She is in the loft!" another man yelled from the side. The shooting became more focused, more brutal. They poured lead into the loft. Clara crawled, scrambling backward as bullets chewed the spot where she had been. Dust and powder smoke filled her lungs. She coughed, her eyes stinging. She moved to a side opening, a gap where the roof had caved in. She saw another man, the one trying to circle back. He was exposed, running through the open snow. She did not hesitate. She fired. He collapsed, a dark, still shape against the white. 2. She was crying now. The tears ran hot tracks through the smoke and grime on her cheeks. She was not crying from fear. She was crying from the awfulness of it, from the sheer, terrible doing of it. She was a killer. She was killing men to protect the man she loved. "Damn you, woman!" The leader's voice Bodhi Ned, full of hate. "You will pay for that!" He was angry. He was being reckless. He stood from behind the wagon, his own rifle up, and fired 3 shots, fast, into the shadows where he thought she was. Clara aimed at his chest. She saw his beard, his dark coat. He was the one who had called Luke a killer. She squeezed. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The man stood still for a second, his rifle lowering, as if in surprise. He looked down at his chest. Then he fell, face first, into the snow. Silence. A deep, ringing, shocking silence. The gunfight, which had felt like an eternity, had lasted less than a minute. Clara's ears rang. The smell of sulfur and smoke was thick in her lungs. She was shaking, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that seized her whole body. "Hello," she cried out, her voice a broken croak. Is anyone there?" Silence. One man, the one she had shot in the shoulder, groaned from the snow. I am here. Do not shoot. Please, I am hit. Bad." "Stay there," she yelled. "Do not move." The other man, the fourth one, was gone. He had fled. She heard the faint, desperate thunder of a horse, already disappearing down the valley. It was over. She dropped the rifle. Her legs gave out. She slid down the hay, half falling, half crawling, back to Luke. He was as she had left him, a broken, bloody mess in the hay. But his eyes were open. He was looking at her, his gaze full of a pained, terrible clarity. He had heard it. He had heard it all. "Clara," he rasped, his voice a faint whisper. "I am here," she sobbed, falling beside him, her body convulsing. "I am here. It is over. They are gone. 2 dead. 1 wounded. 1 ran." He tried to lift his hand, the one she had held all night. He could not. You did that." "I did it," she wept, burying her face in his neck, in the filth and blood. "God forgive me. Luke, I killed them. I killed them." He did not have the strength to hold her. He just lay there, a faint wheeze in his chest. "My Clara," he whispered. She dragged him deeper into the barn, away from the door, away from the wind and the sight of the dead. She pulled the hay up around him, a makeshift, pathetic blanket. She held him close, her body trying to give him its warmth, its life. He was fading. His skin was the color of wet ash. His breathing was shallow, a faint, rattling hitch in his chest. He was gravely hurt. The beating, the ride, the cold, it was too much. "Luke," she whispered, her voice frantic. "Luke, stay with me. Do not close your eyes. Talk to me." His eyes flickered open. "So cold," he breathed. I know. I am here. I am holding you. I will not let you be cold." Snow began to drift through the broken boards of the barn roof. It fell in soft, silent spirals, landing on the hay, on her hair, on his still, pale face. The flakes melted on his skin, like cold tears. The world seemed to hold its breath. The wind died. There was no sound but the groan of the wounded man outside and the faint, terrible rattle of Luke's breathing. You have to run," he whispered. His voice was so thin, she had to put her ear to his lips to hear it. "Clara, now, before more come. Take the horse." "No," she said, her voice fierce, desperate. "I am not leaving you. I told you, we stay." "No," he coughed, a wet, agonizing sound that brought a fleck of blood to his lips. She wiped it away, her hand trembling. He was right. The man I killed, in Laramie, I did not have to. I could have walked away. I am what they say I am. A killer." "You are not," she cried. "You are a good man. You are my man." "Run," he insisted, his voice a thread. "Start over. Find a good place. Forget me. Forget all this. Do not let me ruin you, too." He was giving her permission to leave. He was setting her free. He was trying to die alone, to save her from the curse of his life, of his death. She looked down at his face, this beaten, scarred, beautiful face that she loved more than her own soul. She thought of the line shack, of the cold, of her fear. She thought of his promise. She shook her head, her tears falling fast now, splashing onto his cheeks. "Do not," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Do not you dare leave me naked here." He blinked. He heard her. He understood. She was not talking about her clothes. She was not talking about the cold. She was talking about her heart, her soul, the raw, exposed thing he had promised to protect. If he left her, if he died, he would be leaving her just as she had been when he found her, stripped bare, alone, and freezing in a world that wanted her dead. His gaze held hers, a flicker of the old strength, the old will, returned to his eyes. He could not run, he could not fight, but he could do this one thing for her. He could stay. He did not speak, he just nodded. A faint, almost imperceptible movement of his head. "I will stay." He closed his eyes, and his breathing, though still shallow, seemed to a tiny bit steadier. Days passed, or maybe it was just one long gray day. The snow fell and stopped. The world outside was silent. Clara did not sleep. She held Luke. She melted snow in her hands and wet his lips. She whispered to him, telling him about the valley, about the trout, about the life they would have. She talked, and she held him, and she willed him to live. On the third day, the sun came out. The snow began to melt. Luke's eyes opened, and this time, they were clear. The fever had broken. He looked at her, and his lips cracked into a faint, painful smile. "Clara," he whispered. She sobbed, a deep, shuddering sound of pure, agonizing relief. He survived, barely. It took another week before he could stand. She tended him, her skills born of desperation. She ventured out. The bounty hunter she had shot in the shoulder was gone. He had dragged himself away. The other two, the leader and the one she had shot in the back, were frozen, half buried in the snow. She found the posse's horses, huddled together in a draw. She found their saddlebags. There was food, coffee, bandages. When Luke could walk, leaning heavily on her, they went outside into the bright, melting world. They looked at the two bodies. "We have to bury them," he said, his voice still weak, but steady. "Like I buried Elias," she said. "No," he said, taking her hand. Not like that. Together. It was hard, slow work. The ground was still cold, but soft enough to dig. They buried them side by side, on a hill overlooking the abandoned barn. They made no crosses. They said no prayers. It was just a thing that had to be done. When it was finished, they stood for a moment, the sun on their faces. "They will send more," he said. "I know." "We have to go, north, deep into the mountains, where they will not look." "Yes," she said. They rode north. They crossed frozen rivers, the ice cracking under the horses' hooves. They rode through vast, silent, snow-covered forests. They were silent, scarred. He, by the beatings and the bullet. She, by the memory of the gunfight, by the weight of the lives she had taken. They did not talk about it. They did not have to. They rode for weeks, until the land changed, until the mountains grew higher and the valleys greener. Months later, they found it, a small valley, high in the wild, untouched land. It was a place no one had ever claimed, a place where the grass was knee-high and the river ran clear. They stopped. "Here," Luke said. "Here," she agreed. They built a cabin, with their own hands. They felled the trees, hewing the logs. His shoulder was still stiff, his hands still raw, but he worked with a steady, quiet determination. She worked beside him, chinking the logs with mud and moss. She was as strong as he was. In her own way, they built it small, but solid, a home. They lived. The summer passed into a cool autumn. Luke hunted. Clara planted a small garden, fished in the river. They were alone. They were safe. At night, they would sit by the fire they had built in their own stone hearth. Their love, forged in tragedy and blizzard, remained. It was not a love of passionate words or grand gestures. It was a quiet, unbreakable thing. It was the love of two people who had seen the worst of the world and the worst of each other, and had chosen to stay. Clara had kept one thing from her old life, tucked into her saddlebag. She had carried the remains of her wedding dress, the blood-soaked, torn, mended silk. She had washed it in the river, the water running red, and had hung it from a wooden peg on a beam in their new cabin. It hung there, yellowed, torn, and strange, a ghost in their home. One night, Luke caught her staring at it. The firelight flickered on the pale silk. He said nothing, just watched her face. She turned to him, and a faint, slow smile touched her lips. It was a sad smile, but it was a smile. He took her hand, his scarred, burned fingers lacing through hers. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "The story closes, as it must, in the cold." It was another winter, their first in the new cabin. A soft, gentle snow was falling outside, blanketing their valley in a pure, peaceful white. Clara woke in the middle of the night. The cabin was warm. The fire banked to a low, red glow. She had woken because she was, for a moment, alone in the bed. She turned, a flicker of the old, cold panic rising in her throat. And she saw him. Luke was not gone. He was sitting in the chair by the hearth, just as he had done in the line shack, all that time ago. He was fully dressed, his rifle across his lap. He was not sleeping. He was watching her. He was standing guard. He saw her eyes open. He did not speak, but he smiled, the scarred, quiet smile that was hers alone. She was safe. He was not a drifter. He was a man who stayed. She smiled back in the warm darkness, and as the snow fell softly outside, she closed her eyes and went back to sleep. Thank you for listening to our story. Please comment with where you are listening from to connect with others. Subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel, and share your thoughts in English.